This, this is an interview with Martha Finaughty Page. Finaughty is spelled F-E-N-A-U-G-H-T-Y. She's a longtime resident of Hastings, was born in the house she now lives in on High Street, 67 High Street. The interview is being conducted on the morning of March 31st, 1979, in the Hastings Public Library's Orr Room. Interviewer is Virginia McGuire, representing Hastings Historical Society as a little project for an oral history course at Dobbs Ferry Historical Society. Martha Page gives permission for this interview to be transcribed in writing and to be made available with related material and photographs, if any, for research and educational purposes to the community and to all others interested in the story of Dobbs Ferry. That was an error. It should be for the story of Hastings, of course. Martha and I were talking the other day in the archive session about the Del Bello house and other homes in the area of High Street. So I think we'd like to go back and talk about them some more. Martha, what's your impression of the present Del Bello house story?
Well, as a child, it was a barn, I believe they call them, did they? A stable. Stable, would that be a better
Combination,
word?
maybe.
Yes. Horses and the carriages were there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the coachman and the footman. And
did they live in the barn?
I have the feeling that the footman, the coachman lived in the village, and his name was Welch in my day.
Yes.
And the footman was Flynn, John Flynn. And Mr. Mooney lived in the house that is, I don't know who owns that house now, that is in front of the barn on the same property.
Who was Mr. Mooney? Was he
Mr.
another
Mooney
employee?
was the, I don't know what they called him in them days, a superintendent of the grounds.
I see. Head gardener?
Head gardener, I guess is a word they used in them days.
Mm-hmm.
And that house had been enlarged, which an addition was put on perhaps in the 30s and 30s.
The house where Mr. Mooney lived?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And on the corner of High and the corner that we say the corner of High, there was a house, and that was always empty in my as a child.
Yes.
And they said we used to call it the ghost house.
Would that be on the east side of
The
northeast?
The north, well, east when you say east of Broadway.
Yeah, but
Yes. That is the entrance of the Hall Circle, which is now the Hall Circle.
right. Mm-hmm.
And just in that turn.
Yes.
And as I say, the main house was owned by Mrs. John Moore, and her son Edward lived there with his mother, as I remember it.
Was
Who
that
was affiliated with Tiffany and Company, her son, who was Edward Moore.
I see.
And
Did they stay there in the winter as well as the summer?
no, they went to the city. They
Mm-hmm.
went to the city. They were in one of those brownstones. I don't know what, I even visited their place in the city.
Did you?
Yes, yes.
Oh.
Not having tea with the Moors. It would be,
Yes.
we're acquainted with the cook,
Uh-huh. What was the cook's name, do you remember?
B. McHugh.
Oh.
And
She lived in there, I guess.
Bella Sheridan was the upstairs maid.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps I'm wrong on the upstairs maid. I believe she would be the, would you say waitress? Do they call them waitresses?
Yes.
Is that
Cook
what
and
it's-
waitress were probably.
No, the cook, the B. McHugh was the cook. But
Yeah, a
Bella,
separate person as waitress.
Bella Sheridan served the males. They didn't have a
Mhm.
butler, they had
Mhm.
maid. I don't know what her title would be, really. I've forgotten what it is, what they call them. And her sister worked for Frazier's. This Bella
Ah.
Sheridan's sister
What-
worked for the Frazier's. She was a maid in the Frazier estate, which was across the street, as you know.
What nationality were these ladies?
Irish.
Irish.
Bea was a big, heavy woman, a lovely person, and we used to go to the back door and get gingerbread and a glass of milk.
Oh,
We were kids, you know, going around
Sure.
the woods and visiting, and we visited there in the summer to get that.
mm-hmm.
And then the laundress was Mary. Not going to come to me. His name's not going to come. And the clotheslines were where Dr. Serp's house is now, which is just on the turn of the street across. And that turn, I'm telling you about the Smith house. They came up from the house, and all the lines were facing High Street. The clothes swung on High Street.
running
East
and
and
west.
And then the back entrance was off High Street to this estate, the Moore estate.
Where they go in now, to the Del Bello and Martin house?
No, that was where the house was, the Smith house that
Ah,
burned down. They tore it down. Seems to me it was burned down. The entrance was opposite where I said Florence Katzenstein lives.
Harvard Lane.
The opposite Harvard Lane was the entrance to the Moore house, the side entrance, back entrance, whatever you want to call it.
Did it have big gate posts?
Yes, yes. And the main entrance, the family being brought in by horse and wagon, was from Burnside Drive, which they named Burnside Drive. It was not Burnside Drive in my day. That was
No.
named by the man of Mr. Burns, who owned that estate at one time. That came later.
Owned the Moore estate?
Bought the Moore estate.
Oh.
Burns, his name was. Lived there for a good many years. And he named it Burnside.
Mhm. Did he live in the same
Big
style to
house.
which the
big
Moores
house,
were
the big,
accustomed?
the big house. Yes, well, more or less. He still had that driveway and things. I mean, he didn't cut up the property.
Mhm.
The property didn't get cut up until I think it
30s.
was Mills. I think it was Mills owned it that sold that off. I'm not sure who sold that off. You'd have to. I
For
don't know
the
where
Shadow Lawn development?
Yes, yes, Shadow
perhaps you're
Lawn,
talking
yes.
about the ones the streets that are named after the colleges, Harvard and Amherst and all those streets.
No, that's across the street. No, that's the Fraser Estate. Moore Estate was the Moore Estate was north on High Street,
Yeah.
bordered by Broadway, Billy Burke's estate, down to Farragut Avenue, bordered by Saunders Street, and there's no street north of that, but all that property that has houses on Farragut now was the Moore Estate.
Right, I think.
And,
yeah.
and a horse and wagon road came through that property and came down onto Farragut.
Yes. And that's where the little house is at the end of Ravensdale?
They owned that. That was all
That
Moore
was a
property.
gatehouse,
That was
no.
on the property, yes.
Do you remember who lived in that house?
Mr. Mooney lived in that one time,
Yes.
but not in my time. He lived in the house on up High Street. And he also, this Mr. Mooney, owned a little house, a very old house on Prince Street that he lived in his old days. A little old house of his own. He had bought to keep for when he was retired.
Is the house still standing?
It's still standing, but it's changed so you wouldn't realize it, what it
Sometime
was.
if we go over there,
Right,
will
I'd
you
be
show me
glad to
which
show
one?
you, yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
And I knew Mr. Mooney. He had 2 daughters and a son. The son was a tree man. Them days they called them tree men. They didn't call them, what do they call them now? It's a fancy name we have for tree people, cutting trees. There's a name for them.
landscape gardener?
Well, no. What does it mean to cut men that cut trees? You
I'm
cut
not
this
sure I
all
can
out.
pull the word out either. Aerial artist.
No. Well, whatever.
Uh-huh.
What would you call the condon man that cuts trees? He's got a...
He's a tree man as far as
Is
I
it?
know.
All right. His son was that.
Yes.
And he had 2 sisters. And there's someone not going to get in. There's no door there.
Let's stop.
Was there somebody trying to get in? There was somebody trying to deliver it. And Mooney's one daughter married a Frischman. They had a farm on Stone River Road
In Hastings.
in Hastings.
Whereabouts in Stone River Road?
Guy owns the property now. On the left going up. On the left going up.
I see. Beyond the Mount Hope Station somewhere?
Beyond the Jewish cemetery. We know where Geigy's beyond
Yes.
this Jewish cemetery.
Yes,
Well,
but-
across the street from Geigy, which is now, they have a big parking lot, and they have a tree lit up in the winter, this Christmas time.
Mhm.
Well, that tree was on the Frischman.
Oh, really?
farm. She
Mhm.
married and had 4 or 5 children. And of course I knew her. Lizzie, we called Elizabeth, and she had a sister. Oh, she had 2 sisters. She had, well, really doesn't matter. But what I'm bringing up, which is not that interesting, and you can take it out if you want. I
It's
had a
all
friend used to
interesting.
say to me, "Oh, I'm going to Rochester to visit my friend, and would you like to go?" And for a couple of days. Oh, I said, that sounds interesting. And, you know, we put up at a motel and so forth. And so she kept saying, "My friend this," and she always had the way of saying only a friend. She never say Mary Brown or Sally so-and-so. So going up, we talked, and come to find out, I knew her mother and her grandfather, who was the Moonies, and her name is Horn, married and moved to Henrietta, New York. And we visit there at least once or twice a year. And here's this girl who I know more about her, and she brought out books, that how he kept the books on the Moore estate.
Oh, Martha,
And how much
do you
coal?
think she has anything for the Historical Society?
Well, I'll have to ask her if I get to visit her
Yes.
again. When I talked before, I didn't think of asking, could we, you know, have these books and things, and how much coal cost or whatever. And he, of course, used to visit my parents and sit up, keep them up till 10 o'clock till he had to stoke the stoves, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And my father used to get aggravated. And I said, well, isn't that something that I knew your grandmother, father, and your aunts and uncles, and here now. Didn't know her as a child growing up in Hastings. A mother I would meet once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it just seems something else when you're going around and meet people. And like I said, here you tell me your friend, and I've known about her all these years, and you're telling me a very nice young woman, and calls me Paige. A lot of people just call me Paige.
Oh.
And writes me notes and how am I and all. She's just as nice as can be, and a lovely hostess when we visit there. And now she has 3 grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, some of us go way back when you say, you know your grandfather and your great-grandfather and that sort of thing.
Well, that's wonderful.
And I never did tell him that he was, oh, I better not say what I was going to say. But, yeah, my father used to get aggravated because he'd come and keep them up so late. But see, he did that in order because he couldn't go to bed till he took care of the furnaces and things.
At the Morris
See, he
Gate.
stayed there all year round when they had to have certain heat in the big house.
Yeah. Where did they get the coal? From the Beavers Coal Company?
Most likely, or Dobbs Ferry. With, you know, I'm not sure who they patronize. I feel it's, I think, Hastings people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, then it would be Dobbs Ferry. I think would be the
Yeah.
closest coal company.
Before we turn off, Martha, there were a couple of other things. Recently, somebody asked me about the Markham family, and I read somewhere that
The Markham family.
Billy Burke's place was originally the Markham, or had been occupied by the Markham family. M-A-R-K-H-A-M. Does it ring any bell?
No.
Billy Burke would have
The
gone there in
first, I remember that
1920.
estate, or that house, or however I'd explain it. I was a little girl, and I knew the man who was delivered the express. And he gave me a ride on the express wagon in the back entrance of Farragut Avenue to Billy Burke's house to drop off. I don't know what it was.
Martha, where was the back entrance to Billy Burke?
Right across from, well, you know where the school owns the property now, the
Yes,
Lafergie
where the
property?
girls play
Well,
hockey?
yes, well, it would be south of that
I see.
was a horse and wagon
Roadway.
roadway. And they went in the back entrance with the express wagon. He had a horse pulling this wagon, and I was a little girl sitting in the seat with him. And he delivered something to Billy Burke's house. Now, but that's as much as I can say about that. And then, of course,
Mhm.
she's passed down the house in a sleigh, and in the winter, you know, with
Oh, really?
her fur robe over down High Street. Yes,
Mhm.
Billy Burke. But you didn't make anything out. You just looked out the window or what, and there she goes by. I mean, you didn't fuss over them or knock them down. Like I remembered old Mr. Draper with the big trumpet earpiece. When he walked along, we didn't make no comments as kids, or you didn't go shouting his ear trumpet or anything. You just went around your own business, you know. He was a little short man. He wasn't very tall, as I remember.
Really? Do you remember his first name? Was this...
No, I don't. He had this
Daniel
big
or
trumpet.
John?
I really don't know. I had an idea he was with the grandfather of these
grandfather of the present.
I
Mr.
have the
Drake,
idea,
Dr.
maybe
Drake.
great-grandpa, I really don't know, but I know as a little girl, and I remember this man with the trumpet, and as I said about the lady in the black the other day, I mentioned that and got that straightened out. And Miss Morey, I remember her well, you know, just I guess maybe you'd say good morning, because you were kids, you said good morning to everybody, the minister, the priest, and the rabbis, you know, there was no distinction. Nowadays, people pass you right by, don't even say hello to you.
Miss Morey was here in 32 at least when they dedicated one of the telescopes over there in the park. But otherwise, I think she was away a good bit.
I really don't, and I just know of Miss Moore. And then there would, I don't know if she had a sister that married and lived in the Heights. There's some relation that lived in the Heights.
Nye?
Yes. Was that a sister of her or some relation?
I'm not sure of the relationship.
There was some relationship, I thought, and I could be a sister, and I'm not sure. She married late in life, and I
think
really...
her husband taught in school, didn't he?
I really don't remember that. Who, this Mrs. Nye?
Mr. Nye.
Mr. Nye in our school?
I believe so.
Well, that name doesn't ring a bell. But I knew her to see and knew who she was, you know, over the years, and she lived up in the Heights. And as I said, she married late in life.
Now the people, such as the cook, the waitress, the laundress, and others, had rooms, I suppose, on the top floor of
On the
that
third
house.
floor, and when I went to visit, I knew that house in and out, because as a youngster I could run up and down the beautiful staircase. My grandmother used to go there in the summer to help the cook do all the delicacies, desserts and desserts and things, because she was just a plain cook.
Yeah.
So my grandmother was hired to go there, and we used to meet her at night, and she'd have little goodies for us. We used to go as far as the well. That was like, a short distance. You know where I live on High Street, up to the corner.
Right.
But that was just woods. There was no only one or two houses. You'd go meet your grandmother. Go meet your grandmother. She'd come, and we'd go as far as the well as kids and help grandma home.
Sure, she had goodies.
Yes. But, as I said, she did all the fancy cooking there, all the desserts, because she had the talent for that, and they make up all the fancy preserves and things for the winter. Then, in the winter, my mother used to take me to visit the people because they were friends. They used to give me little gifts, those women, because my mother and grandmother befriended them, and, you know, it was company for them to come visit us and have tea or coffee.
Yes.
And I remember going to this beautiful brownstone house down in the basement where they would be, and then the upper stairs and so forth. And the Moore house, as I said, was always so beautiful, and still, as a child, things look so much different. But even each time I've gone back, and I remember the time movies were taken on that grounds. The rush crowd, what do they call it, with like 100 people rushing through that beautiful overhang of that house.
The porte-cochere.
Yes. They took movies. See, we had a lot of movies taken around here because we had a movie company over in Fair Park.
Yes.
So my brothers were older. They'd be in these rush scenes. You know, the kids, they give them 50 cents or a quarter to come running through down. From High Street down, they rushed. Whatever the picture was, I don't know. But, of course, I was there taking in whatever was going around because I was a gallivanter around, you know, get around. Not the village as much. That's what I always say. Village I'm not as familiar with as I am with the outskirts.
That
Different. Yes, I think they took that off the staircase. Oh, we talked about the help. When I visited whoever owned the house before Martin, I went in there before Martin's bought it. We went to the third floor, which they had left more of, had the zinc bathtub on the third floor. But they hadn't removed the beautiful marble and bath hand basins and things. People never did move those, which was fortunate because I remember those as a kid thinking how beautiful these were, and they're still beautiful. And fortunately, the people over the years did not remove them.
But what a magnificent view there is from the top of that.
Yes, and that little tower there, that was where the children's toys were kept after they had all grown up, or grandchildren. Their books and things used to be up there. And many times I climbed that little staircase, you know, and walk and look at the books and things. Yeah. So I really know that in and out more than Frazier's. Frazier's, I had tea with the Frazier ladies at one time as a little girl. Young, I want to say little girl. My mother took me there, and they served us tea. They were lovely, very gracious people, you know. And they did beautiful handwork, sewing and things, and I was fascinated by that because we sat, in the drawing room and had tea. And you knew them going by. You didn't see them that much. And of course, I think they went into the city too when they went to the Frasers.
I guess
believe they did.
many of the families here
And of
did.
course, you knew the caretakers, more or less, of the families, like the Dunbars and the Nichols and
Were the Dunbars
Dunbars were the
caretakers?
well, we call them caretakers. I don't know. They
Mhm.
have different titles today, and the house is still there, caretakers. And then then it came the chauffeur.
Was
Came
the
down to the chauffeur when they called him the chauffeur. See, they held the horse and wagons. Delaney was the coachman in my day because my brother went to school with the Delaney boys, and they lived in a little house on Broadway, the head of Broadway that,
Near the bus stop?
yes, boy from Hastings had the Frasers either gave or sold it to them. He
The
worked
one-
for them.
The little house with the gingerbread trim?
Mhm. That was the coachman's house, Delaney.
It's a cute place.
Yeah, and the other house is old, and that man worked for Fraser for years. That corner house where the two women lived, the two old maids. They're I forgot their name now. Halloran or something, Irish name. Right on the corner. The three houses right in the corner. There's the little one with the gingerbread.
Yes.
The one next to it, that's a very old house, and he worked for Fraser.
Is that south? That's south of the gingerbread?
No,
North.
south, you're right, south. Then you turn the corner, is that stone
Warren
house.
Street? That's
Yeah,
Warren Street.
That's where Haynes lived. My aunt went there as a bride. In that old stone house that they owned. The Hayneses owned that. And in my day, Liza Booth lived in there because her house burned down and Liza lived there.
When you look at the Langmuir files, you're going to see a picture of Liza's house. I glanced
Well,
at it
a
this
wooden
morning.
house?
Yes.
Yeah, it burned down, you see. So
When
then,
do you think it burned?
see, those were all dirt roads, nothing, you lived, that was the woods, and her place was covered with lilacs. And we had them home, but we used to steal the lilacs and sell them in Longview. Take bunches of lilacs. And violets we used to sell to people coming up the driveway, kids.
Mm-hmm.
But Liza, I used to visit with a cousin. She used to go up there for eggs. I told you that the chickens would be in the house, leaving the legs on the couch. And poor Liza dressed like the women are dressing today with the men's high shoes, and
Yes.
the long black skirt. Didn't have the slacks. But she was more or less, I don't know if she went to church or not. But I always thought Judge Booth in Haight Yonkers was related to her.
Well, his name was Boot. I was very friendly with his
Oh, Booth,
daughter.
I thought-
B-O-O-T-E.
It was B-O-O-T-H, wasn't it the same?
No.
Judge Booth?
No.
Was
There
there
could have-
another Judge Booth?
Maybe there was another judge.
I know he was a homely little man.
Charles W. Booth.
And I always thought that I tell you who was related, but I don't think he lives there, but his wife lives there, Magna or something. You know that name from Yonkers?
Yes, my
M.A.
father did that house. He designed
That little house
old
on Warren?
Yes. And they first had that little
Well,
stone
she's still
building.
in there and said, but I don't know if he died of it. But I think it was he that was related to Liza Booth, that she gave him that property. Or
Yes,
deeded
I
to him.
recall he was given the property and it
Yes.
had that little stone building that later became the garage. And then my father designed the house that is alongside of it now, the Cape Cod style
East of that.
West of the little stone garage.
On Warren Street we're talking about.
Yes.
Well, they built that garage and had it there for years. They
That
called
was
it,
the
came up there in
for
the summer.
Frasers.
No.
Whose was it? Who built it?
I have to go down that street. I haven't been down there in a long time.
We
I
have to
can't,
take a little ride.
because Fraser was on the other side. They did not
Yes.
own that.
I see.
Fraser owned north of where this house is, if we're
Mhm.
talking about the same house.
Mm-hmm.
But Liza's was on the other street. Her wooden house was on the other street, south of that. It was on
Street
Hudson Street.
partway down the hill?
Hudson.
I'm not sure I know Hudson.
We got Hudson, which comes up over the hill and down to Broadway, and then next to that, I think we got Goodwin Street, and then we got Warren Street.
I should have a map when I go.
Well, that's all right. Warren Street was supposed to be from High Street to Broadway. And when they built houses up there, the first big house came on there was the Fraser's sister. It was the Fraser's niece, the original Fraser's niece. Her name was Young. Built this beautiful brick house there.
Oh, yes, Youngs are still living in that house.
Young's own it now, but her name was Brewer. Fraser girl married a Brewer.
I see.
They built that beautiful house on the Fraser property. And then when people selling off the properties, a house went up east of that. And those people put addition on something, put it on Warren Street, and they never stopped them. Warren Street was supposed to be cut right over the Broadway from High Street. And that's been killed now over the years. For some reason, they got away with it. It wasn't taken away from them.
Well, it's pretty steep in there, isn't it?
Yes, but so is Fulton. And Hudson Street was supposed to go up over. They always walked right up Hudson Street to their house. Mr. Costello and the Cropseys used to walk right to their houses, was up on the top of that hill, and they never went around. They came right up. So, anyway, but talking about Liza and that, as I said, the house burned down, the house she lived in, and then she was living in this, which must have had something to do with her, or somebody she was related to owned it, that she could even go there and live there. And she was elderly, when I think of her. And of course, people looked older then at 50 than they do today, you know. But my cousin, she used to take me, walk up over that hill and go visit Liza, and we'd be giggling.
Martha asked that the tape be stopped at this point, so thanks to her are not recorded. This is May 12th, 1979. Lily Fredericks has come into the archives. She's been looking at maps and reminiscing about early Hastings days. She was born in the house on the northeast corner of Warburton and Washington, a brick building that's still standing, owned at that time by Mrs. Neppert, who I believe was a daughter-in-law of, I think, Henry Cattenhorn, one of the Cattenhorns, at least, who lived on Maple Avenue. So Millie will kind of take us around the block between Washington, Broadway, Main Street, and back by way of Warburton. So go ahead.
Well, going up Washington Avenue, the first house belonged to Whaley's, Ellie Whaley's father. And the next was the Cropsey house.
Did Mr. Whaley work for the Cropseys?
No, he worked in New York, I'm sure. I didn't know too much about him. And then going up the hill, there was your grandfather, McConnell's. Oh yes, the Fagans and the McConnell house.
Now, did the Fagan have anything to do with the ones who ran the saloon on Maple? There was a little tiny saloon over there. Okay.
And then the Marr house. I guess that was all. And then you came to the aqueduct.
How was Marr spelled? Is that
M-A-H-E-R, wasn't it? M-A-H-E-R.
Beg your pardon?
And then it was the big one, the house in, oh yes, then the aqueduct. And then,
Was there ever a candy factory that you heard of? Someone came in the other day and said there was supposed to have been a candy factory on Washington, on the east side of the aqueduct.
I never heard of one. And then, for the Conway house, that was on the corner.
Corner Broadway.
Yes, it was set back quite far. And
That house
was-
is gone now.
no. Oh yes, that's the new house, that new house, that's Church's new house. And then going down Broadway, to the north, there was the Tally-Ho stable.
Tell a little bit about the Tally-Ho stable.
Well,
It was a good-looking building in those days.
Well, we thought it was wonderful. I don't know what people then thought it was pretty nice. But the Tally-Ho came up from New York, taking the golfers up to, was it Tarrytown? Ardsley, to the clubhouse.
Yes.
And it was very pretty to see them. They had a man with a horn sitting in the back seat, and they had prancing horses, and they always had those fishnet blankets on, you know, with the tassels on the bottom, to the bottom of the ship. And they changed horses there. And we would
Who ran the
sometimes-
stable from the point of view of Hastings operated?
I don't know whether it was run by anybody from Hastings. And we used to go up there to watch them
Yes.
change the horses. And we would also pick violets or any of the flowers in season, and people were glad to buy them.
That must have been fun.
Yes. And then what else? Oh, the
Then
next was the cook's
The
woods.
cook's house.
And Mrs. Cook's house was set way back in the woods, and it was very, very dark and gloomy.
It was a
And-
real old house,
Oh,
wasn't
it was very old. And it had wisteria, which would pull down. It had a big porch on the north side, and the
Mhm.
wisteria, was heavy, and it used to pull that porch down. It looked very dilapidated.
Yeah.
But she didn't care much to have children around. And she lived by herself, as far as I know.
And that was the house the Cleland family, the minister from Grace Church, later moved into, I think. We have some recollections
Gee.
from his daughter, yes, Florinda Cleland Layton.
It could be. But later on, she married Mr. Fowler,
Yes.
who worked at the printing press.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, I'm sure, quite a bit younger than she. He seemed
Yes.
to
And you
be.
think there are no Cook descendants, even from any other
No,
branches of the
no.
family? Because
Yes.
for the centennial, they would love to find a
Uh-huh.
cook if they could.
Yes. Well, she was always there by herself. She
Yeah.
was an old
There were
maid.
no cousins or
No, nobody
nieces,
ever came
nephews?
there. No. But
Mhm.
then she gave, when she married this Fowler, Mr. Fowler, she gave that property to the Episcopal Church
Yes.
with the understanding in, I've forgotten how many years, maybe 10, they were to build a church,
Mm.
but they didn't have
They
the money
couldn't
to
do it.
build, and they were going to lose it.
Mhm.
So then they moved the little church from Main Street
Yeah.
up there.
That was in 1931 that it moved up.
Yes, it went up on big wheels or logs, I guess they were,
Yeah.
up the Main Street.
And they ran out of money halfway up?
Yes, yes, but it finally was located. I think it looks awfully cute.
Oh, it is
in
in
there.
a lovely
Mm.
spot, right now. It's lovely. Well, then,
And across-
working your way down the street, you
Mhm.
come to Fraser Free School, which you went to, right?
Yes, well, across the way was a Christie estate.
Oh, yeah,
Across the
talk
way
about the
from
Christie
Cook's Wood.
estate.
And they had a very nice house there. And our church first held services there, I believe.
The Reformed Church?
Yes. See,
Ah.
there's a big tablet in our church.
Yes.
It looks like a bathtub. I used to think it was a bathtub. It does resemble a bathtub. It's a big piece of marble. And it has the Christie's name.
I see.
And
They
we had-
gave a good deal of money to help the Reformed
Yes.
Church.
Well, our first, I think they held the first services up in the Christie place. Whether it was the,
Now, was this the William Christie or Frank Christie?
this was William Christie.
Yes.
Mhm.
Frank Christie had another house north of the big Christie house.
Yes, I believe
There
it
was one that
yes.
they refer to as the chalet,
Yes, there was one up there. Mm.
and that was Frank Christie.
Yes.
That's
But this-
supposed to have been designed by Carl Brandt, the artist who lived where the Veterans
Veterans
Building
yes.
is.
Uh-huh. Well, what did I want to say? Oh, they had a gardener was named English. In fact, it's Bill English's father. He is also a member here.
Yes.
He was the gardener. And
Oh, really?
they lived in a very small house on Main Street on the north side. And it was right against the bank, so that you went down the steps to get in the
Close,
first floor.
perhaps, to where the entrance to the A&P is now?
No, it was up almost to the corner.
Oh,
It was
near
way
the
up,
corner.
yes.
Mhm.
And there was a nice little brook that ran down there, and then it ran down. It was the same brook that went under the sidewalk at the blacksmith shop there.
And it is the same brook that we see the picture of in the Cropsey show across the hall?
Yes,
Right.
yes. Mhm. And
Do you remember the sound that brook made? Someone
Yes.
spoke about it having
Yes.
been a very noisy brook.
It was noisy. Oh, it sounded nice though.
Mhm.
And there used to be lovely watercress in that brook up at the Christie's. Up at, yes,
They had quite a garden there where the
Beautiful
A&P parking
garden.
lot is.
beautiful garden. Yeah, Mr. English took care of all that. And who was their coachman?
You'll think
Oh,
of
isn't
it.
that
But
awful?
weren't there a couple of identical houses on the same side as the Christie house? Smaller cottages?
Excuse me. As you came down where the city bank is now,
Yes.
there were the Dolan cottages.
Mhm.
There were 4. They were little tiny cottages. And there was a Mr. and Mrs. Milnbrink that lived in one. They were very, they had a little candy store.
In the house?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And their houses had a little front porch like that, and it had a little seat on either side. And they used to live down, I think, on the farm. They came from down there.
What home?
The one, let me see where.
On Maple Avenue?
No, down on Broadway, way
Oh,
down.
Down
And they
near
used to deliver,
Tompkins Avenue. There was
they
a
used to
farm
deliver,
sold
that was
vegetables
it,
and things.
milk. He sold
Yes.
milk. Then they
Was
were
that the
very
Lee
old.
farm?
No. Oh, the Lee farm was over further. No, this is on Broadway. It's, I think it's where the church is now.
Oh, where the
Right
Dykeman
there,
house was.
yes. He was there for a while, I'm sure, and then he moved up to the corner.
Didn't Grace LaFay's
Yes.
relatives,
Our
grandparents, or
grandparents, because
great-uncle
I have been in that house,
live in the so-called Dykeman
the
house?
Dykeman house.
Well, was there
and-
another farm along there?
No, I think that was the same, but I think it was after they moved out. But in that farm, there was a divided door, a lower part, you could open the top. And they had, I don't know whether they were ducks or geese, in the backyard. And I wanted to see them, but I was afraid of them, so they only opened the bottom of the door so you could look out at them. That's one thing I remember about that farmhouse.
This was the
That
Dykeman house.
Yes.
Mhm.
See, he was my uncle.
Oh,
Mildred, Grace's grandfather, Grace LaFay's grandfather, was my mother's brother,
and his name was
Beavers.
Beavers.
Yes. And
Well,
he
now-
was a brother of the Beavers that owned the International Hotel. And my
And-
mother was his brother.
And then Tompkins and Beavers were in the coal business.
Yes, well, that was my uncle. He was the one that had the International Hotel.
Yes.
And then he and Forty Tompkins, who was a big friend of his, went in the coal business.
You think the International Hotel was on the riverside of the tracks? I've often wondered about a building that looks as though it could have been a hotel or boarding house that you see from the station now, a brown shingle.
No, it was torn down because they owned a place up in the manor, which, let me see who lives there now. Dr. Bender lived there. You know his house on Ballard Avenue?
Afraid I don't, but we could find
Well,
it in the directory.
it's, Reynolds' house was on the corner,
Yes.
and his was next.
Oh.
No, there was another one, then Uncle Charlie's. This second one wasn't
Is that
there.
the one that's been painted yellow and looks so nice now?
I don't know. But, got my point I was going to give you.
That's
about
right.
that-
Well, tell a little
oh,
bit
about
about
those-
Checkers there, where Reynolds Field is.
Well, we're down to Mills
All right,
Cottages.
3 Mills Cottages.
And so there were the 4 cottages, and as I say, these older people lived in there. And later on, I believe they made them into 2-family houses. Now, I think there was only one room in the kitchen on the first floor, but they managed somehow.
And you
But-
said your father bought one of those.
No,
Oh,
no, down, the Mills is way down. These were up on
oh, you're
the
still
Dol-
talking
on
about
the
the
Dolan
Dorland.
cottages,
Mhm.
yes. And then the next, as you're coming down, then you hit the Mills estate.
Yes.
It is where they're putting the new ambulance building.
Mhm.
That was included in the Mills.
Oh.
And the brook ran along the side here.
Where the
and-
present Whitman Street is must have gone right through Mills property, didn't it?
We didn't have Whitman Street.
No. But
No.
if the street had been through, that would have hit their property?
Yes, well, the Mills is owned from that little stream all the way down to the Episcopal Church. Yes, and I had a nice picture of that entrance there a long time ago. But their road was right next to the Episcopal Church on Main Street.
The
And
Mills entrance.
and you went up, and up to their house up on the top. Now, I don't know who he was connected with, but there were 3, Edmund, Susan, and what's the other girl? Marguerite. They were in our kindergarten class.
Yes, that shows on the map.
Let's see. That's good.
Took a little breather there. Now, Mrs. Frederick wants to tell us about the way they got
mills.
the water in the Mills cottages.
The Mills built these 4 cottages across the street from their place, and up in the attic he had a huge water tank, and the water had come from the Mills estate. Then the Mills, there were 3 children, Edmund, Susie, Marguerite, I think. And they also attended the first kindergarten class, which we also attended.
That was Miss
And-
Trube's.
Miss Truby, yes.
Truby.
And
Mrs.
Then-
McNeese told me that was more or less of a progressive school. She had some very modern ideas.
yes, and we didn't have children at the age of 5. They were sometimes 4 and sometimes 7 years old, because the 3 Mills children were of different ages.
And it was a private
then-
school.
It was a private school.
Yeah.
It was just just trying it out, really.
Mm-hmm.
And but then Mr. Mills, for some reason or other, lost all that property,
Mhm.
and the bank in Yonkers took it over.
Oh, really?
And they tore down the building.
When
the
do you
house.
think that was?
Let's see. It's been the early 1900s. Maybe 1992.
Before 1910?
Oh, yes, because we used to play with them. See, we lived across the street.
Yeah.
I had a sister a year older, and we used to play with them. We also used to come to the fence, which was down here, and it's next to James Daily Post.
Yes,
There's a fence in back
the former
there.
Brandt place.
Yes, well, Dr. Brandt lived there. In fact, he was our doctor.
He was the son of the artist Carl Brandt, I guess, wasn't he? Was his name
He was-
Erdman Brandt?
His name was Carl Brandt. He was the doctor.
Carl Erdman
And he
Brandt.
had a daughter, Isabel, and she married a man named Walker.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Brand was an artist too, and he
Oh.
painted a life-size picture of Christ. I wonder where it is.
I know where one of them is. It's up in the parish hall at Grace Church. But I thought it was done by the father, Carl L. Brandt.
This was Carl.
There were 2 Carls, I guess. Carl Erdman was the
Yeah,
son, and
what I was
Carl
going to
L. was
say.
the father, who
But I
later
had
went to
seen that.
Savannah.
Oh.
And he
But
painted this thing. He was almost dying, I guess. He was very sick, but he was determined to finish the picture, and they have it up there at Grace Church.
Well, the eyes follow you. Well, it was in the basement for a long, long time.
It's
Nobody
so
knew what
big
happened to
that
it.
it has to be on rollers. Is this the same
I
one?
guess it's the same one. Yes. And he had a daughter, Isabel, and she married a man named Walker. They had a daughter, Isabel, and Isabel used to come up there up to see her grandfather,
Mhm.
and she would come down to the fence. She was on her side, and Mrs. Mills' children and my sister and I were on the other side. And one day she said, "Do we want to see her pet?" And we said, "Yes." And we thought it was going to be a little cat. It was a snake. And she let that thing fly out. I never shall forget it. But Isabel wasn't allowed to come over to the Mills, but we played back and forth, and she'd show us her dolls.
Now, the Mills place had an entrance from Constance Street or Warburton, whatever they were calling it at that time.
No.
No. The Brandt place did.
Yes.
And what was it like? Was it a U-shaped driveway that took up a lot of space, or was it
The brand?
at the moment? Or
But
there's
those
only one
steps-
sidewalk and some steps going in?
That's the way it was,
There was
I
no
remember.
carriage entrance?
Not that I remember. I love on the side. Oh, that's where Ferrera's and those stores, there were 2 lovely houses, and they were set back. They had porches in the front. I think they were double houses. And Emma Hoyt lived in one for quite a long time. And an expert bridge player. What was her name? Tall, thin woman. And and she went, Irwin.
Yes, I've seen that name, Helen Irwin.
I don't remember what her first name was, but she was an expert bridge player. She used to.
Well, now, Mrs. McNeese has told me about a house that I think her aunt, Mrs. Bastido, had, which is on the present Whitman Street.
Yes,
Maybe there
but
was no
that-
street at that time, I don't know.
That house, I know. Emma White lived in one of those houses,
Yeah.
and Bastidos lived in the other. They were
Yes.
related to Byra. But that was up right next to Bob's gas station. Because Bob's gas station, there was a private house there, a Mrs. Hubner.
Right.
Miss Hubner. She was not married. And she was a lovely person. I think she lived alone. And she was a very good worker in the Catholic Church. She did a lot for them. And they used to have a fair. And every year she would dress a doll, a huge doll, and had the most beautiful clothes. And one year she gave Emma Hoyt, who lived next door, next to the Bastido house, and she gave her one of those for Christmas. Now, we thought it was the most beautiful thing. Funny thing, the hair, instead of being like our hair, it was a big matted mess that came down, but it was dressed beautifully. Emma's father had a hardware store where, let's see.
Yes, we're going to
paper.
talk about Maple Avenue as a little diversion. The Phillips House, which I think is 26 Maple, it has the red stones on the front. We all love the house very much. So what are your recollections?
Well, there was a girl at school, her name was O'Teal Burbett, and she lived there.
Mm-hmm.
Her aunt was the principal of the school. Now, this was before my day, but Mr. Todd, who owned the drugstore, and several other Hastings older people, knew about Bertha Burbett, the aunt, who was a school principal. And it seems though she carried a hose in the back and she'd hit them over the legs with it. Oh, they said she was something. Now, she was an aunt to this girl that lived in that house. Where the aunt lived, I don't know. This was before my day. But whether the aunt lived in that house, too, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we went there, I had an older sister, and O'Teal was at school with us, and she wanted us to come to play. And in those days, you asked if you could go.
Yeah.
You didn't just run around the way the children do today. And she said, yes, we could go. And when we came back, Mother said, did you and Edith have a nice time? Oh, I said, we had the loveliest time. I said, she has a playhouse. And I said, a playhouse? And I said, yes, it was a chicken coop, and we played in it. And Mother said, I don't think you better go there anymore. But it was a very cute little place. And she had two brothers, and one was Lynn Burbett, and he was a very big, heavy fellow. And he was a clerk at Todd's drugstore for years and years and years. Do you remember him? And that's where they lived in that place.
Well, let's go back up Main Street where we left off. How about Fraser Free School? I don't want to skip that.
Oh, let's see. Now, starting up at the Broadway, that was Cook's Wood,
Yes.
down as far as the German church.
Yes.
And then, after that, was the Dorland estate. And the Dorlands, was Ella, and she had a sister. I can't think of the sister's name. Huh? DeVoe, Mrs. DeVoe. And they lived, also, there was another sister lived there for a while, and they had a daughter, Edith, and she was our age. And we played there. She had a summer house in the back of that house
Is
there.
this the house that Farragut lived in the early days?
No, Farragut lived in the bigger one. This is on the side. You can't see it from the street. It sets back. It sets in back of that shoe store.
Yes.
You know what? It sits right in back of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they built those cottages across the street. Those 4 Dorland cottages. They belong to them.
Now, there was a Dorland store, too, wasn't there?
Yes. Now, yeah, remember, I'll tell you about that. Then the next was the Baptist Church, which
Right.
is now the it's Catholic
St.
Church.
Stanislaus.
Yes, that was the Baptist Church, and they used to submerge them when they joined the church.
How
And
did this Baptist stay there until St. Stanislaus took over, or was it empty for a while?
I don't think it was empty. I don't really remember.
We're trying to find out about the Baptist church and haven't had much luck with it.
The entrance isn't as it is now. You went from the street up, and then there was a leveling, and then you went up again, and up where the pulpit is, they had a sliding floor, and we went there to see them baptize once.
Oh, yeah.
And we walked down the steps. They pulled this sliding door, floor, whatever it was. And then, of course, next was the old school.
Right.
And that was really very pretty. We loved that school.
That's
And-
a beautiful building, right?
Yes, and they had a little outhouse. I'm so sorry that was just like the school too.
Oh, it was, a stone
Oh,
one?
yes, a nice stone one, and it was sort of set high, and there were about 4 steps that went up to it. And it was quite a good size, but there was a wooden partition right down here through the middle, and all the way to the school. And if you wanted to leave the room, the girls went on this side, and the boys had to go around the back of the school and go in that side.
Yeah.
And then next was Segegrin's. Yes, next came the waterfall, and then Segegrin's. He was a tinsmith that lived down there.
That was the little building you had to approach by walking across a culvert on a little
No,
platform or something?
no, you just went right down
Oh.
to the waterfall, and the house was over there. And then,
Sorry. And over Segegrin's was the Orchard place?
No, over Segegrin's was their home.
Oh.
The building was pretty dilapidated looking, but he had a tin shop downstairs. They lived upstairs. And then the next building was the blacksmith shop and the carriage shop.
Oh.
And the carriage shop was up over you had to go down the side lane to get into where they shod the horses.
That was probably Factory Lane that came
That was
up the hill.
Factory Lane. And to the left was Mr. McClave's blacksmith shop. And from the front, you could go over the blacksmith shop, and that was Archer's carriage shop. There were planks.
Did he actually build carriages?
No, I don't believe he did, but he monogrammed them and fixed them.
Kept them in
But,
nice shape.
yes. See, we had the wealthy people all had
Yes,
carriages,
I suppose.
and they were monogrammed and so on, and he did all this fancy work. And then in back of the blacksmith shop, the McClaves lived,
Oh, yeah.
and Agnes,
That's
became
the
a
house.
teacher here.
That's the house you looked at in the picture over in the Cropsey exhibition, do you think?
Yes.
The White House?
Yes. Well, it's part of the blacksmith shop. It was all in one. And as I say, it went down Factory Lane.
Yeah.
And then
Oh.
that was,
We even have a map that shows another street between Main Street and Factory Lane, halfway up the hill. Whether the map indicated something that was never put through.
it couldn't because my father owned one of those cottages, and we owned down to the Factory Lane because we used to have, there was a wall, and then we had a fence, but we owned all, and I wanted to have a little table out in the backyard so we could have picnics. And I went down there and cut some of the trees and made a table for our backyard.
Yeah. It must have been a pretty steep backyard, wasn't it?
No, the backyard wasn't, but this incline was, and it went all the way to, they all owned down to the factory. Then the next house was Murphy's, and they had also that going to the factory. But on this side, they had a high stone wall to keep it from the next building, because the people in the next building...
That was the
is-
west side of their property.
Yes, but the people in the next building, they had a passageway that went down There were people that lived on the first level and on the second level and
Yes.
on the third level.
Yeah.
And there was always that high wall alongside of Murphy's to hold up their backyard.
Mhm. So these were your house and one next to it were one family to start with.
Four one family houses.
Or one family.
Yes.
But these other levels that you speak about.
That was the next, they are
They were
still there.
different
those
buildings.
Are still,
Yeah.
That building is still there. It's been fixed up, of course. They look like new buildings,
Mhm.
but they are still there.
Yeah.
And then as you went down, now the end of that building, I've forgotten, there was a Mr. Salvaggio. She lives in Hastings. Is that it?
Josephine dos Santos?
She used to be a Sarajevo, and they were Italians, and
Mhm.
her father had a shoe shop there, a repair shop.
Yes.
And they bought, if you wanted your shoes soled, he had the leather, you know, in big strips like this, and he would cut around
Mhm.
and cut the leather, and he'd sometimes have little pieces left. And oh yes, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
where
Where the present cleaners
the
is.
cleaners, yes. And
That-
those other two buildings, the other side of the cleaners, that was where we played. That was the play yard for the school.
That was Miss
That's where-
Truby's school.
That was where the picture was taken in that.
Yes.
Out there.
Mhm.
And then let's see, Sarajevo over there. Then there was a German family named Kunkler, and they had a bakery shop right next to the shoe store. They had the most wonderful things. And on Saturdays they made these crumb coffee cakes, and it wasn't just little thin crumbs. They were nice. And you'd buy a coffee cake, and they cut them with a knife, and I think they were 10 cents. It was a big coffee cake, and it would always run down the side. And Mrs. Kunkler, they were short German fat people, awfully nice. And we'd go in on Saturday afternoon, and all the crumbs she would save, and we could have those. Oh, they were, it was just a treat.
Did she live over her store?
Yes, I think, well, they lived in the back. And in front, there was the sidewalk was only really half the sidewalk. From here over, there was an iron grill that went over as far as the store was here, and this is the sidewalk, and there was an iron grill that went across. And down here, there was a sloping place. It was wide, it was wider than this. And they bring the flour in these big bags, and they opened the grill, and the flour would slide down
To their cellar.
into their cellar where they did the baking. And Myrtle Capron, who lived in the first cottage where we lived, she and I were walking along one day, and she was always falling anyway. She wasn't watching where she was going, and they had just put flour in, and this was open, and the first thing you know, Myrtle was gone. Here she went down with the flour. If she hadn't been with the flour, she'd have been hurt, but here she was down in the flour bin. She remembers it too. She is still alive.
Is that May Capron?
No,
No.
she's not related to them. And she was Mrs. Miller's, Mrs. Miller's nephew's child. His wife died. He married again, and then Aunt Beth, as we called her, took Myrtle. And then let's see what was next. Then we went along a little further, and there was a friend's apartment house. That's where the Green Tavern is, and all those buildings.
Yes.
But it didn't look like that. Mr. Friend had a saloon, and that was on the right. And it was just a small saloon. He was never open at night. He was never open on Sunday. And he was a very lovely person. But the rest was just apartments. He lived on the first floor. And when it was finished, my father and mother moved in there as bride and groom, and my sister was born there.
I think they called it the honeymoon flat, didn't they?
Yes. Oh, no, that isn't Honeymoon Flats. They're across the street. No, that was Friends Flats. That was quite an apartment house. And let me see, what was next? Oh,
Rupert?
they, no, there was a little house, where there was a sort of, what do you call it? A wall of, it was wooden though, next to the, what is it,
Cabin?
Friend's place. And Mr. Friend used to sit against, he didn't do very much business, but he would sit out in a chair and lean his chair against that wooden wall. And we would go and sit on his lap. He was awfully good to his children. And he had a dog, Rover. He had a daughter and a son. The son was married. But the daughter, Laura, you know Laura? She lived at home. And every Sunday we took Rover the dog and Laura and my sister and I and Myrtle. And we walked to the golf, over to St. Andrew's Golf, to look for golf balls.
Good night.
Every Sunday we walked.
That was quite a little trip to get the golf balls, and then would you sell them?
No, we
You
played
just wanted-
jacks.
you just wanted
we,
to golf?
we played, you know what, jack
Yes,
stones?
yes.
Well, we used golf balls,
Yes.
and that's where we got the golf balls. Over St. And then let's see what was next. Then there was a little house that set back. I don't know who really lived in that.
Libra? They lived in the house down, I was going to ask you about the house down under the viaduct, that I think Algeo owned.
Oh, yes.
And there's
No,
a
I don't
story
know.
that was once the railroad station. The old railroad station. Do you have any idea what it was? Weird color.
I think they did. There was a little house sitting back, and I think they did.
Did it face Main Street?
Yes, yes. And then the next was Mr. Miller's grocery store, where the shoe store is now, and the cobbler's, that was Mr. Miller's grocery store.
So then Rupert's hardware store was built later, perhaps where the...
No, he had just a little tiny store, and the door, I remember very well, was not from the street. You went into this lot, and it was on the side, on the bridge side. That's where the door was. And then they enlarged it, and made a big store. After a while, that little house was pulled down, and I think that Rupert took all that little store.
Looking at some of the old maps, we think that there was a house between the present potholder store and the shoe store before the bridge opened
Before the
and
bridge.
Warburton went through. It could have been another
It
house
could have
there,
been.
but we don't know who owned it.
But that corner store, Ansel, remember Ansel? Yeah, right next to the bridge. You know, where Miller's store was, it opened on Constance Street, as they called it. And across the way, I don't remember whose store that was, but there was a big shed all across that corner.
You're speaking of the west side of Constance now, where Algio's or Todd's...
No, that other corner. Where the,
Ben's son?
Ben's son was.
Yeah. The Riders?
Yes, and Ryder. Well, no, Coffman's lived in the house. There was a house next to it that Coffman's lived in now. This was always a store, and there were uprights at the curb and a roof.
Oh,
that
yes.
was all enclosed, all across the corner there.
I think we have a picture of that.
I don't know whose store it was.
Didn't Ryder have a haberdashery there?
Yes, but this is before he.
Yeah.
That's very old there. Very old. And then going up Main. Oh,
The
yes.
Sexton, my friend the Kellaways lived in there.
Yes, yes. The Episcopal Church. Then there was a nice piece of property, and then this house where the sexton lived. But that piece of property went like this and way in the back.
And the building where the 5 and 10 was is now Mansley's, has in the bricks at the top of it 1903.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember who built that building? Or what
Yes.
that was
Now,
used
wait a
for?
minute. Zimkowitz. Didn't Zimkowitz buy that? I think it was such a Zimkowitz.
Was it always a store, or was it houses, apartments?
No, it was never a store. They were. Oh, Zimkowitz? Hickcraft owned the bakery before these people that I spoke of, the Kunklers, the Hickcrafts, and they had the Kunkler was little, she was a tall woman, and Harry, the son, was a very tall man. I think they built that. I remember when it was built. And it was just apartments, and there were 2 entrances, and there were 3 apartments this side of the entrance and 3 this side. And there was another entrance and 3 here and 3 here. And they were really, nice and neat.
Yes, it looked like a
places.
well-built building.
And that, I think, is
I think they've applied that name to various places.
Yes,
I heard of
they
Hastings-on being called.
Oh, up where we are? No, we were long after they, ours isn't old, but.
And now where the Villard Construction Company is,
Mhm.
that was once a First National Bank?
That was First National Bank. It was right across the street from our house.
Yeah.
And I think there was a man named Mr. Kellogg and Mr. Munson. And Wardy Compton had a big interest in that.
I wonder when they put Whitman Street here. Were there people named Whitman? I think we've seen that on a couple of maps. But spelled differently, W-I-T-T instead of W-H-I-T.
I don't ever remember saying it. They were up in Whitman Place. That was not developed. That belonged to the Christies.
Yes.
That was old Christie Place, and they had a gate on what's now used to be Constant Street.
Mm-hmm.
The gate.
The Christies had a gate on?
Yes.
On
yes.
Constant? About where would that be? Where
was-
the
Let's see.
Federal
I know it's up
Savings
there.
and Loan?
No, it was up further than that. There was a
Near
stone
the
wall.
diner, maybe? How about
Yes.
with respect to those 2 orchard houses? The house back of the diner is an orchard house, I think.
Yes. No, they were there when we were.
They're old.
Yes, but it was before you came to those.
Mhm.
But there was those stores. Nothing was along there, and that belonged to the Christies. And there was a gate there. There were some steps to go up, and there was iron fence all around it.
Shall we stop for a little while and take a
Okay.
break? We were talking about the itinerant photographer who brought the little pony around for children to
Oh,
sit on.
yes, this man used to bring his pony around, and you didn't have to pay very much, but he'd take your picture. Also, a man used to come around with the hurdy-gurdy, and he would crank it all the time. Another man used to come around, and it looked like just a stick, and there was a box on top of this stick, and a little monkey on top, and he ground out the music
Yes.
with the little monkey
And
on
the
top.
monkey would pass his cap.
That's his cap, yes.
I can remember that.
And then also on Sundays, we didn't have anywhere to buy ice cream. And the ice cream man used to come around on Sundays, and he would ring this, he was in a wagon and a horse, and he would ring this, it was a bell, with a handle on it. He would do this, and he'd go out with a dish, and he had a scoop, it was like a pyramid almost, and it had a little top on it with a little thing, and he'd scoop it in the ice cream and hold it over your dish and just turn this, and your ice cream would come out in a little.
The
You
original
only-
Good Humor Man.
But it was only vanilla ice cream, and it had nothing
How on
else.
earth did he keep it frozen, do you think?
It must have been. We didn't have. I don't know whether even Todd had this ice cream then. This fellow always came every Sunday. We always had ice cream. Yes.
Was there ever a little truck with popcorn being produced and sold along the street? And some villages had a little popcorn truck.
You weren't big enough to have a popcorn.
Tell us about the appendectomy in Dr. Jenks Hospital.
Oh, well, that was something. I was teaching in Yonkers, and I had these awful pains, and my father had gone fishing with Sid Thursby. The Thursby lived across the way from the cemetery, and they were great fishermen. As Sid was, he was unmarried, and my father was a freshwater fisherman. He was an off fishing. And I had an appendectomy, and Dr. Jenks had a garage on the window, and he decided he would have a chocolate. So this was on Sunday night, and he said, well, you've got to have an operation. And I said, am I going to the office? He said, no, we'll go right there. But I said, you have a nurse. I'll have a nurse. I said, okay. So he called St. John's Hospital, and he got this nurse. Her name was Alexander Lyle, Alexander. She was employed. And so Dr. Jenks had some other doctor come with him. But I remember we didn't have a operating coat or anything. And my brother had a new pair of pajamas. And he said, get a pair of the pajama top. So I went home and I brought this new pajama top. That's what Dr. Jenks used. And it was a big open room, and he had a curtain across so he could take, I guess, 4 patients. And so...
Was this on the ground floor or the second
No,
floor of that little building?
He had his car on the ground floor, if you please. Now, he had built this garage, too, but he lived next door. And he had everything in it. He had the foundation with cement, but he had in it beer bottles and bed springs, anything else to hold the cement. And he was really very handy. He wanted to be an engineer, and his father insisted he be a doctor. So he was a very crude one. However, I said he was good. And so he brought this nurse up, and she was an awfully nice person. First she wasn't going to stay when she found out what it was. And said, oh, please stay. I've got to have someone besides Dr. Jenks. And he also invited her over. And so she said, okay. Well, his son, Mrs. Jenks's son, lived with them. His name was Dan Richard. And Dan and Doc didn't get along very well together. Dan, he became a doctor himself. And he was engaged to Helen, the name Dunbar girl. And Lyle and Dan used to come up and sit with me in the car. And one time, Dan and the Lesters, Mr. Lester had a new car, and they were going down to one of the mountains that go down south. And so Dan went with them, and the first thing you know, Dan cheered again. Their car caught fire and burned, so they had to come back. And Dan went down to see his girlfriend, and she was already on another date. They were engaged. So, I don't know whether you want this in. Oh, it's fun. It is fun. Anyway, he was curious, and he was in medical school. And so he came back, and he was curious. And he said, well, will you go out with me? And I thought, I didn't say, I said, fine. she was a good-looking girl and a lovely person. So we said, okay. She said, okay. So she did. She went out with him several times. Well, he and Alice broke off. I guess Alice.
Which house did they live in? Around the...
Right next to where the garage was, right next to the hospital. We lived on Olinda Avenue, up on Olinda, up the avenue, and they were on the corner, and then this was on Olinda. And anyway, so Lyle stayed, and we got to be very good friends. She used to come over an awful lot. We'd go out together. And then one day she said, come on, she said, Dan and I are going out for a ride. I want to go. And we went. We started out, and then she said, I want to show you something. And I said, I know what it is. And she said, what? I said, I bet you're engaged. And she was furious. They were. They were not only engaged, they had gotten married. You didn't have to go through the rigmarole you do now. And lo and behold, because she had the wedding ring pinned inside of her under her. And so one day she said, don't you mention anybody. I said, no, I didn't. So Dan went back to college, and Lyle stayed with Dr. Jenks in the district. Well, Dan came home. This was just before the summer vacation. He came home for vacation for a while. And when he was ready to go back, Mrs. Jenks, Lyle said, I'm going back with Dan. And Mrs. Jenks said, certainly I'm not. She was very prim. You are not. And she said, well, after all, who's my husband? I'm telling you. Oh, the fire certainly flew. And they married, and she died about 5 years ago. But we were still, he went to Pennsylvania.
Oh, he didn't practice here.
But he made it. He came back to the area. I don't know whether he's still alive. He met after Lyle died. He married again.
What other houses were on Hopkins Avenue at that time?
When we moved there was the Hopkins house, which was at the end, and the Stallmans lived in that.
Yeah.
And they lost it. And so it was empty for a long, long time. It was, pretty bad condition. The outside was always all right. It was stone, but the other part was bad. But the only one next to that was Dr. Jenks built the first one. He was on the corner. And then 2 lots up from that was Burns, Mr. Burns. He was a lawyer. And then my father built ours. And that was all there was for a long time.
And that Burns was no connection of the Burns who had the Moore house and called the place Burnside and developed that.
No, he was a lawyer there in Hastings, and they had no children. Yes, they did. I think then they came from Hillside and bought this house. Burns didn't own it first. Oh, Mrs. Fesmington. Yes, Mrs. Fesmington owned it.
This is the house on Hopkins.
Yes, that Marchetti bought ours. They live in our house. And what's the name of the people now? Davis, Alice Davis. So those things. And then the next house belonged to Andrew Stone. He died. I don't know who lives there now, but the Hopkins house, that's
That's
the
where
Grants.
the Deans lived. Yes.
Yes, the Grants bought it first.
Oh, the man who did dancing.
Yes, and then the Deans, I guess. I don't know who has it now.
I think the Deans still
Oh,
owned it
do
when
they?
that Joel Dean died.
Yes,
He had a
yes.
business there on the third floor.
Oh, did
I
you?
believe so, no?
Yes, I remember seeing
The Reformed Church built 4 cottages, look-alikes. We've been talking about
Yes.
look-alikes in
Let me see, who was the minister there? Yeah, they were on Private Avenue.
And they moved one around the corner into Hopkins?
Yeah.
Or into Olinda?
Yeah, yes, that was true. The Browns did that. They bought that and put it there. But before they had the cottages there, they had a barn, long barn.
Oh, you keep the horses in cold weather when the
I don't
people
know
were
what it
sick?
was, but who was that man that the minister? They didn't care too much about him, and he tore that down and put those cottages in.
Oh, really?
Yes, but Sigafus, Mr. Sigafus, he was the minister. Huh? Oh, yes. He was the minister when I was christened, when we were little, Mr. Sigafus.
He boarded with the Cropseys the last couple of years of Cropsey's life.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and his daughter lives in Yonkers and has two Cropsey paintings that were given to her.
Is that so?
Her father hadn't done anything with that.
Oh. Well, that reminds me. I taught down in the 13th school, and there was a part of that Sigafus family
Yes, they
that
lived in
went
South
down to...
It was
went to the-
Orville,
Yes, Orville.
Lola, Perla,
Mhm.
and another one, I think.
Mhm.
Well, Lola's the one I know. She married Dick Eady.
Oh, is that so? We did have a place for the horses and carriages on Sundays at the Reformed Church.
Oh, you did?
Yes. As you go toward Yonkers, on the left-hand side, we have a bank that goes up. Well, that bank wasn't there.
On Broadway?
Yes, on Broadway, and it was there was a big space there, and you put your horse and carriage in there and fastened it.
I suppose
When
they
we were
widened
little.
Broadway, and that was when that was taken out.
Yes. And they also, I guess, didn't need it anymore if people had cars, and they, part of that bank was the, where they put the hooked horses.
Time to quit? Mrs. Fredis, we certainly want to thank
Oh,
you. The Historical Society is very grateful. And you're nice to do this, and you've done it willingly. Would you like to hear it before, we won't release it or anything, but what we've been doing is just to make an outline of the things that have been covered. And if you'd like to hear the whole thing through and point out any spots you want taken away, we can
Nobody
do that.
would know.
I don't think there's anything damaging.
I was going to say, when my father, he used to